It was supposed to be a simple road trip, but they never came back. The silence of the high desert was a liar. It wasn't empty, it was full of a vast, humming dread. It was a silence that swallowed sound, that drank the heat from your skin, and the hope from your heart. For 3 years, that silence had been the only answer Amelia Hayes received. 3 years since the laughter of her son, Leo, had echoed in her memory. A ghost sound she chased in her sleep. The air inside the rented RV was stale, thick with the smell of dust, cheap air freshener, and the metallic tang of her own fear. Outside, the Nevada sun beat down on the cracked earth, a relentless hammer of light and heat. Amelia stared out the window at the endless expanse of sagebrush and rock, her knuckles white where she gripped a worn photograph. Leo, Chloe, Sam, and Maya. 4 faces, vibrant with the arrogant, beautiful immortality of youth, squinting into a sun just like this one. The last picture, taken at a gas station just outside of Tonopah, an hour before they vanished from the face of the earth. Anything. The voice was gentle, but it scraped against Amelia's raw nerves. It was David, Chloe's father, a man hollowed out by the same grief that was eating her alive. He sat at the small dinette table, a map spread before him like a patient etherized upon a table. It was covered in red circles, frantic X's, and the faint, greasy smudges of 3 years of desperate fingerprints. Amelia shook her head, not trusting her voice. She didn't need to look. She knew what was out there. Nothing. Nothing but the shimmering heat haze and the mocking, indifferent blue of the sky. They had done this every year. A pilgrimage to the site of their own personal apocalypse. They would drive the route, stop where the car was last seen on a traffic camera, and walk. They would walk until their feet bled, calling the names of their children into the wind, their voices swallowed by the vast, hungry silence. The official search had been massive. Helicopters had chopped the air for weeks. Search and rescue teams, hundreds of volunteers, had combed the desolate landscape. They found nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a shoelace, not a single drop of blood. The car, a vintage 1978 Ford Bronco that Leo had lovingly restored, was also gone. It was as if the 4 of them, and the 2-ton vehicle they were in, had simply been plucked from reality. The sheriff called again this morning, David said, his voice flat. He was tracing a line on the map with a dry, cracked finger. Told me we were torturing ourselves. Told me it was time to accept. Amelia finally turned from the window, her eyes burning. Accept what, David? That they're gone? I accept. That I live with that every second of every day. What I don't accept is this. She swept her hand, a gesture encompassing the empty desert, the useless map, the crushing not knowing. I don't accept the silence. Something happened here, something violent and terrible. I feel it in my bones. Her own voice was a stranger to her, a harsh, guttural thing. She hadn't been this person before. Before, she was a kindergarten teacher. She smelled of crayons and Elmer's glue. She had soft hands and a softer heart. Now, her hands were calloused, from digging, from scrambling over rocks, and her heart was a tight, withered knot of rage. David sighed. The sound of a man deflating. I know, Amelia, but we've looked everywhere. We've hired private investigators. We've offered a reward that bankrupted both our families. There's nothing left to find. There's always something, she whispered, turning back to the window. Her gaze fell upon a glint of light in the distance. Something metallic, half buried in the sand, about 100 yards off the road. It was probably nothing. A beer can, a piece of trash. But in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed, man is king. And in the desert of the lost, any glint of light was a potential sun. Stop the RV, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. David looked up, startled. What? Why? Just stop. He pulled the lumbering vehicle to a halt on the shoulder of the empty highway. Before it had even stopped rocking, Amelia had the door open and was clambering down the steps, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The heat hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She ignored it, her eyes fixed on that distant sparkle. She started walking, then jogging, her worn-out sneakers kicking up puffs of pale dust. The ground was uneven, littered with sharp rocks and thorny scrub. She stumbled once, catching herself on a gnarled creosote bush, its bitter, medicinal scent filling the air. "Amelia, wait." David's voice was a faint cry behind her. She didn't wait. She couldn't. It was a compulsion, a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. As she got closer, she saw that it wasn't a can. It was smaller, and it was attached to something. Something dark and leathery. Her breath hitched. Her jog slowed to a cautious walk. The silence of the desert seemed to deepen, pressing in on her, amplifying the sound of her own blood roaring in her ears. 10 feet away, 5, she stopped, her shadow falling over the object. It was a shoe, a single mud-caked hiking boot, the kind Leo always wore, and sticking out of the dirt beside it, catching the cruel light of the sun, was the unmistakable silver glint of a small, engraved metal plate on the side of the sole. A custom edition he'd been so proud of. It was a tiny stylized compass. Rose. Amelia fell to her knees, her hands trembling as she reached for it. The leather was stiff, cracked from the sun and the cycles of heat and cold. The laces were gone. She dug her fingers into the hard-packed earth around it, scrabbling like a desperate animal. The boot was empty. But as she pulled it free, something else came with it. A piece of fabric, snagged on the heel. It was a scrap of denim, faded and torn, and it was stained with a dark, rusty color that wasn't mud. A wave of nausea washed over her. She squeezed her eyes shut, the image of Leo's smiling face flashing behind her eyelids. "It's just a shoe," she told herself. "It could be anyone's." But, she knew. A mother knows. This was a piece of her son. The first piece she had held in 3 years. David came running up behind her, his breath ragged. "My God, Amelia, is that?" She couldn't answer. She could only hold up the boot, a holy relic of a lost boy. He knelt beside her, his face ashen. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the dark stain on the denim scrap. "Is that blood?" he whispered. The word hung in the air, obscene and horrifying. Blood. The one thing the searchers had never found. The one thing that proved this wasn't a simple case of kids running off for an adventure. It was proof of the violence she had always felt simmering beneath the surface of this empty land. And then she saw it. A few feet from where the boot had been buried, a subtle depression in the sand, almost completely erased by the wind and time. It was a long, rectangular shape, roughly 6 feet by 3. A grave. A choked sob escaped her lips. It wasn't a sound of grief, not yet. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Because this wasn't just a grave. There was another one next to it, and another, and another. 4 shallow, unmarked indentations in the earth, arranged in a neat, horrifying row. This wasn't a place where they had gotten lost. This was a place where they had been brought. A place where they had been executed. David saw it too. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, waxy gray. He scrambled backwards, away from the graves. A guttural sound of denial catching in his throat. But Amelia was frozen, her eyes locked on the 4 depressions in the sand. The lipless silence of the desert finally spoke, and its voice was the scream of her own breaking heart. This was it, the end of the search, the beginning of the nightmare. Her phone, which she kept in her pocket for the GPS, buzzed. She ignored. It buzzed again, insistent. Annoyed, blinded by tears, she pulled it out. It was a text message from an unknown number. Her hands were shaking so hard, she could barely read the screen. The message contained only a single sentence. "You should have stopped looking." A cold dread, colder than any desert night, washed over her, eclipsing the heat of the sun. Her head snapped up. She scanned the horizon, the empty road, the distant, shimmering mountains. There was no one there, no cars, no people, just the wind, whispering through the sagebrush. But they were being watched. She knew it with a certainty that defied logic. The text wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning, a threat. Someone had seen them find this place. Someone who knew what had happened here. Someone who had gotten away with murder for 3 years and they were still here. The RV, their only link to safety, to civilization, suddenly looked a million miles away. The desert was no longer empty. It was an arena, and they had just stepped into it. The silence was no longer an absence of sound. It was the held breath of a predator. David was still on the ground, staring at the graves, his face a mask of brokenness. But Amelia's grief was instantly cauterized by a new, terrifying emotion. Rage. A primal, protective fury. They had taken her son, they had buried him in this God-forsaken wasteland, and now they were threatening her for finding him. She clutched the boot to her chest, the stained denim a brand against her skin. She would not run, she would not be silenced. They had made a mistake, they had left a witness, not to the crime, but to its aftermath, and a mother's grief. She realized in that blinding, terrible moment, could be a more dangerous weapon than any gun. She stood up, her legs unsteady but her resolve like iron. She looked back at the 4 shallow graves, a silent vow forming in her soul. I will find you, she promised the ghosts of her son and his friends, and I will make them pay. The phone buzzed in her hand again. Another text from the same unknown number. This one was just 2 words. He's next. Amelia's blood ran cold. He, who was he? Her mind raced. Her ex-husband, her father. And then, the horrifying realization hit her. David. They were talking about David. She spun around, her heart seizing in her chest. David was no longer looking at the graves. He was looking at something behind her, his eyes wide with a terror she had never seen before. His mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. Slowly, Amelia turned. Standing on a low rise of rock not 50 feet away was a man. He was a silhouette against the blinding sun, a tall, broad figure whose features were obscured by the glare. He was perfectly still, watching them. He held something long and dark in his hands. A rifle. The world seemed to slow down, the silence stretching into a high-pitched whine in Amelia's ears. The heat, the grief, the ragged, all vanished, replaced by a single primal instinct, survival. She opened her mouth to scream, to warn David, but it was too late. The crack of the rifle shot was sharp and deafening, a brutal violation of the desert's quiet. It wasn't a boom. It was a whip-crack, a sound that tore through the air and through her soul. A puff of dust exploded from the ground, just inches from David's head. He cried out, scrambling backward, his hands flailing in the dirt. The man on the rocks didn't move. He hadn't been aiming to kill. Not yet. It was a warning shot, a demonstration of power, a punctuation mark at the end of his texted threat. He's next. Amelia's mind fractured. Part of her was screaming, a silent internal shriek of pure animal panic. Another part, the cold analytical part that had kept her going for 3 years, was calculating. The distance, the weapon, the lack of cover. They were exposed. They were helpless. The man raised the rifle again, the sunlight glinting off the long barrel. He wasn't a silhouette anymore. The sun shifted, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping second, she saw his face. It was a face she knew, a face that had been on the news, a face that had offered condolences, a face that belonged to the town's most powerful man, a man who was supposed to be a pillar of the community, a friend to the sheriff, a local hero. Sheriff Marcus Thorne. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be. But the face was unmistakable, etched in her memory from countless town meetings and press conferences about the search for their missing children. The kind, reassuring face that had looked her in the eye and promised he would do everything in his power to bring Leo home. It was all a lie. A monstrous, sickening lie. He wasn't here to help them. He was the reason they needed help. He wasn't the investigator. He was the architect of their pain. He hadn't been searching for their children. He had been hiding them. The rifle was steady in his hands, aimed directly at David's chest. The world narrowed to that single, terrifying point of focus. The dark, circular void of the barrel. Time stopped. The desert held its breath, and in that frozen moment of horrifying clarity, Amelia understood. This was never a mystery. It was a cover-up, and they had just dug up the evidence that would get them killed. The Bronco felt alive. Not in a mechanical sense, but in a spiritual one. It was a vessel of ghosts, humming with the phantom energy of the 4 people who had filled it with laughter and bad singing and the boundless optimism of youth. Leo had loved this truck. He'd spent a whole summer under its hood, his long limbs sticking out, his face smeared with grease, his knuckles perpetually busted. He'd called it the Beast. It was meant to be their chariot to freedom. A 4-day road trip to a music festival in the desert, a final glorious hurrah before college and responsibility came knocking. Leo was the sun around which their small constellation of friends orbited. He was effortlessly golden. Not just his sun-streaked hair or the easy tan on his skin, but his very essence. He had a way of looking at you, a focused, genuine interest that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. But beneath that radiant surface was a fault line of melancholy he rarely showed. His father had died in a car crash when he was 10, a sudden, senseless tragedy that had left a permanent shadow. Leo's obsession with restoring the Bronco, with making it safe, with mastering the machine, was his way of wrestling with that ghost. He was trying to tame the very thing that had taken his father from him. He was the group's anchor, its heart, the one who believed in second chances and happy endings, because he had to. Chloe was his counterpoint, the moon to his sun. She was a whirlwind of dark hair, dark eyes, and even darker humor. She wrote poetry that could make you weep, and told jokes that were borderline felonious. She was David's daughter, and she'd inherited his sharp, analytical mind. But she'd coated it in a thick layer of punk rock cynicism. Her mother had walked out on them when Chloe was 6, leaving nothing but a note and a closet full of clothes she never came back for. That abandonment had forged Chloe into a fortress of self-reliance. She trusted no one, except Leo, with him. Her walls came down. She saw the shadow in him, and he saw the scared little girl in her. They fit. Their love wasn't a fairy tale. It was a treaty, a pact between 2 survivors. She was the witness, the one who saw everything. The one who wrote it all down in the leather-bound journal she never went anywhere without. Then there was Sam. Sam was the muscle. The comic relief, the loyal, lovable golden retriever of the group. He was big and loud and perpetually hungry. He was the son of a preacher, but his only religion was the gym and his unwavering devotion to his friends. He was simple, but not stupid. He saw the world in black and white, right and wrong, and he would have walked through fire for any of them. His secret, the one he buried under layers of bravado and protein shakes, was a crippling fear of his own father. The Reverend Johnson was a man of fire and brimstone. A man whose love was conditional, whose disappointment was a physical force. Sam lived in the long, cold shadow of his father's pulpit, and his boisterous personality was a shield against the quiet terror of never being good enough. He was the victim, the one whose naive trust in the goodness of people would make him the most vulnerable. And Maya, sweet, gentle Maya. She was the quiet one, the observer, the artist. She communicated more with her sketchbook than with her words. She saw the world in shapes and colors, in light and shadow. She was the adopted daughter of a wealthy, older couple who doted on her but never truly understood her. She was their precious, fragile doll, a role she played with dutiful grace. But inside, she was screaming. Her sketchbook was her escape, filled with fantastical creatures and dark swirling landscapes that hinted at a deep well of pain. Her secret was a recurring nightmare, a fragmented memory from before her adoption. A flash of a dark room and a man's angry face. She was the one who would see the monster and recognize it for what it was, because she had seen it before. The antagonist, Sheriff Marcus Thorne, was a man carved from the very rock of the county he presided over. He was a local legend, a high school football star who'd gone off to the army, done 2 tours in Afghanistan, and come back a decorated hero. He was handsome in a rugged, sun-weathered way, with a square jaw and eyes the color of a faded blue sky. He had a pretty wife, 2 perfect kids, and a reputation for being firm but fair. He was the town's protector, its father figure. He projected an aura of unshakable calm, of absolute control. But behind the badge and the hero's smile was a man rotting from the inside out. The rot had started in the war. Not in the heat of battle, but in the long, quiet moments in between. The boredom, the fear, the casual brutality that became a second language. He'd discovered a taste for power, a thrill in the absolute authority of life and death. When he came home, the quiet life of a small-town sheriff felt like a cage. The respect he commanded wasn't enough. He needed more. He started small, skimming from evidence lockers, taking kickbacks from local businesses, using his authority to intimidate rivals and settle old scores. His biggest secret, the one that fueled his escalating cruelty, was financial. He was deeply in debt. A series of bad investments in a housing development scheme with Maya's adoptive father, Mr. Harrington, had gone sour. Harrington, a man who saw everything as a transaction, had Thorne under his thumb. He owned the sheriff, and he used him as his personal enforcer, his tool to keep the town in line, to make problems disappear. Thorne's public persona was a carefully constructed lie, a mask to hide the desperate, cornered animal beneath. He was the wolf in shepherd's clothing, and the desert was his hunting ground. The road trip was supposed to be simple. For days of music, sun, and freedom. They'd packed the beast with a tent, coolers full of beer and sandwiches, and a playlist of 90s rock. The mood was electric. They were on the cusp of everything, that perfect, fleeting moment between being a kid and being an adult. The trouble started at a gas station in Tonopah. It was a nothing little place, shimmering in the heat. As Leo was filling the tank, a black late-model pickup truck pulled in, parking too close to them. Two men got out. They were big, rough-looking guys, the kind who worked with their hands and settled arguments with their fists. They swaggered into the convenience store, their eyes lingering on Chloe and Maya for a moment too long. Sam, ever the protector, bristled. "What's their problem?" he muttered, crossing his thick arms over his chest. "Their problem is they've never seen girls before." Chloe shot back, not missing a beat. "Ignore them, they're just local color." But Maya shrank back, pulling her oversized hoodie tighter around herself. She'd gone pale. "I don't like the way they looked at us," she whispered, her eyes wide. In her sketchbook, she quickly drew two snarling wolves with greedy human eyes. Leo finished with the gas, his easy smile firmly in place. "All right, team, let's mount up. The desert awaits." He was oblivious, lost in the happy hum of his perfectly running engine. They pulled out onto the highway, the windows down, the music blasting. For an hour, it was perfect. The road stretched out before them, a black ribbon on a canvas of brown and gold. They were singing along to Pearl Jam, passing a bag of chips back and forth. The whole world in front of them. They didn't notice the black pickup truck that had pulled out of the gas station a few minutes after them. They didn't notice it, keeping a steady, deliberate distance, a dark shark trailing a school of bright, oblivious fish. The first sign that something was wrong was when the beast's engine sputtered. It coughed once, twice, then died. Leo coasted to the shoulder, a string of curses under his breath. "No, no, no," he muttered, turning the key. "The engine just clicked. It can't be. I just rebuilt the whole fuel system." He popped the Houdin got out, the others following him into the oppressive heat. The sun was relentless. The silence of the desert rushed in to fill the void left by the music. "What do you think it is?" Sam asked, peering into the engine bay, as if he had any idea what he was looking at. "I don't know," Leo said, his frustration mounting. "It doesn't make any sense." Chloe leaned against the truck's fender, her arms crossed. "Maybe it's a sign. Maybe the universe is telling us that a 4-day festival of corporate-sponsored nihilism is a bad idea." "Not helping, Chloe," Leo grunted, his hands already covered in grease. Maya was quiet, her eyes scanning the empty road behind them. She was chewing on her thumbnail, a nervous habit she'd never managed to break. "That truck," she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "What truck?" Sam asked. "The one from the gas station. It just went past." They all looked up. In the distance, a black pickup was disappearing over a rise in the road. So, Sam said. It's a highway. It slowed down when it passed us, Maya insisted. They were watching us. A prickle of unease went through Chloe. She'd seen it too. Just a flash of a face in the passenger window, a glint of sunlight off a pair of sunglasses. She'd dismissed it, but Maya's fear was contagious. An hour passed, the heat was becoming unbearable. They were out of water. Leo, drenched in sweat, was no closer to figuring out the problem. His frustration had curdled into a quiet despair. His perfect machine, his shield against the ghosts of the past, had failed him. And then, they heard the sound of an approaching engine. A wave of relief washed over them. It was a police cruiser, its lights not flashing, cruising slowly towards them. Oh, thank God, Sam breathed. Stepping towards the road and waving his arms, the cruiser pulled up behind the Bronco. The door opened, and Sheriff Marcus Thorne stepped out. He was the picture of calm authority. He adjusted his sunglasses, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered pistol. "Having some car trouble, kids?" he asked, his voice a smooth, reassuring baritone. Leo wiped his greasy hands on his jeans and walked back to meet him. "Yeah, Sheriff, engine just died on us. Can't figure out why." Thorne walked over to the engine, gave it a cursory glance, and then looked back at Leo. A strange, knowing little smile played on his lips. "I think I know what your problem is." He reached into the engine bay, his hand disappearing near the fuel line. When he pulled it out, he was holding a small dark object. It looked like a sugar cube, but it was dense and slightly greasy. "What is that?" Leo asked, frowning. "It's a military-grade solvent block," Thorne said, his voice casual. "Drop one of these in a gas tank, it'll dissolve in about an hour. Turns the gasoline to jelly, clogs the whole system. We used to use them to disable enemy vehicles in Afghanistan." A cold knot formed in Leo's stomach. Someone put that in our tank." "Looks that way," Thorne said, tossing the block from hand to hand. "Happened back at that gas station in Tonopah, I'd wager. You kids piss anyone off back there?" Sam and Chloe exchanged a look. The two men in the black pickup, Maya's fear suddenly seemed a lot less irrational. There were these two guys, Sam started, but Thorne held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't worry about them. I know who they are. Local troublemakers. I'll have a word." He gave them a comforting, fatherly smile. "The important thing is, you're all safe. But this truck isn't going anywhere. I'll call you a tow. In the meantime, why don't you all pile into my cruiser? I'll give you a ride back to town. We'll get you checked into a motel. Get this all sorted out." The offer was so reasonable, so kind. The relief was immense. They were hot, tired, and scared. The sheriff was their savior, a knight in a shining cruiser. "Thank you, Sheriff," Leo said, the gratitude evident in his voice. "Thank you so much." They gathered their backpacks from the Bronco. As Chloe grabbed hers, her fingers brushed against her leather journal. A sudden, inexplicable chill ran down her spine. It was a whisper of intuition, a flicker of the distrust that had kept her safe her whole life. Something felt wrong. The sheriff's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His kindness felt rehearsed. "I'm just going to grab my book," she said, turning back to the truck. Thorne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "No need to bring all your stuff, little lady. We're just going to town. You can get it from the truck after it's towed." His tone was still friendly, but there was an edge to it now, a hint of command. It was the tone a parent uses when they're done asking and have started telling. Chloe hesitated, her hand on the journal. Her eyes met Maya's. Maya gave a tiny, almost invisible shake of her head. She felt it too, but Sam was already climbing into the back of the cruiser. "Come on, Chloe, let's go. I'm dying out here." Leo, trusting and relieved, put a hand on her shoulder. "He's right, let's go. The sheriff is helping us." Chloe's instincts were screaming at her. Don't get in the car. Don't. Trust the smile, but she was outnumbered. To refuse would be to create a scene, to seem paranoid and ungrateful. Against her better judgment, she let go of the journal, leaving it tucked in the side pocket of her backpack in the Bronco. It was The single biggest mistake of her life. She slid into the back of the cruiser next to Maya, Sam on her other side. Leo got in the front passenger seat. The doors closed with a heavy, solid thud. The sound of a cell door locking. Thorn got back in the driver's seat. He didn't start the car right away. He just sat there for a moment, looking at them in the rearview mirror. The friendly, reassuring mask was gone. His eyes were as cold and empty as the desert sky. "Everyone comfortable?" he asked. The question was a mockery. No one answered. The air in the car was suddenly thick and suffocating. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. Thorn turned the key. The engine roared to life, but he didn't turn back towards town. He turned the cruiser off the highway and onto a narrow, unmarked dirt track that led deep into the desolate, empty heart of the desert. The injustice was a physical thing, a boot on Leo's neck. He was on his knees in the dirt, the rough gravel, biting into his skin. The desert sun, which hours ago had represented freedom, was now a merciless interrogator's lamp. Sheriff Thorne stood over him, a silhouette of casual menace. The fatherly mask had been completely stripped away, revealing the rotten core beneath. "I don't understand," Leo choked out, his voice hoarse with disbelief and fear. "Why are you doing this?" Thorne chuckled, a dry rasping sound, like stones grinding together. "You kids and your questions. Always why. You don't need to know why. You just need to know your place." He'd driven them for miles down the winding dirt track, the cruiser kicking up a plume of dust that erased their path, swallowing them whole. He'd stopped in a shallow rocky basin, miles from the highway, a place where no one would ever stumble upon them by accident, a place designed for secrets. The black pickup truck from the gas station was already there, waiting. The two rough-looking men were leaning against it, their arms crossed, their faces impassive. They'd been pulled from the cruiser, their backpacks thrown into a pile. Sam, seeing the two men, had surged forward, his protective instincts kicking. "I knew you did this to our truck." One of the men, the bigger of the two, had stepped forward and, with a single brutal punch to the stomach, folded Sam in half. Sam had collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, the fight knocked out of him before it could even begin. Chloe had screamed, a raw, furious sound. The second man had grabbed her, his hand clamped over her mouth, his other arm pinning her against the side of the pickup. Maya was frozen, her body trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming silently down her face. Now, Thorne was focused on Leo. He saw Leo as the leader, the one he needed to break first. He crouched down, his face inches from Leo's. His breath smelled of coffee and something sour. "Let me tell you a story, son," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Once upon a time, there was a man who owned a town. He worked hard to keep it clean, to keep it quiet. But then, some rich, important people this man needed to keep happy, they got themselves into a little bit of trouble, a little family trouble." He glanced over at Maya, who was being held by the arm, her sketchbook clutched to her chest like a shield. A flicker of understanding, cold and horrifying, passed through Leo. Maya's adoptive father, Mr. Harrington, the man who was developing property with Thorne. And then, Thorne continued, his gaze returning to Leo, for little birds, chirping and singing, decided to fly right into the middle of a spider's web. And the spider, well, he can't have anyone knowing about his web, can he? He can't have anyone scaring off his business partners. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't random. This wasn't about two thugs at a gas station. This was about something Maya knew, or something they thought. "She knew Maya," Leo said, his voice cracking. "This is about Maya," Thorne smiled. "The girl's got a talent. She draws things she's not supposed to remember. Her daddy, Mr. Harrington, he's very concerned about her active imagination. He asked me, as a friend, to have a little chat with her, to help her forget." The cruelty was breathtaking. They were going to terrorize a traumatized girl to protect a powerful man's secrets. "You're a monster," Chloe spat, her voice muffled by the hand over her mouth. Her eyes, dark and furious, were locked on Thorn. Thorn's smile vanished. He stood up and walked over to her. He slowly peeled the man's hand from her mouth. "I'm a businessman, little lady. And right now, you four are a liability, a loose end." He ran a finger down her cheek, a gesture that was both intimate and deeply threatening. Chloe flinched but didn't look away. Her defiance was a flame in the darkness, and it only seemed to amuse him. "What do you want from us?" Sam gasped from the ground, where he was still struggling to breathe. His simple black and white world had been shattered into a million gray pieces. The hero was the villain. The law was the crime. "Want?" Thorn said, turning his attention to Sam. He kicked him lightly in the ribs. "I don't want anything from you. I want you to disappear. But first, we're going to have our chat with the artist." He nodded to the men. The bigger one, the one who had punched Sam, walked over to Maya. He was huge, a mountain of muscle and menace. He smiled, a grotesque twisting of his lips. "Give me the book, little girl." Maya clutched the sketchbook tighter, shaking her head, her silent tears turning into frantic sobs. "No, please." She said. "No," Leo said, his voice low and dangerous. He started to get to his feet. Thorn was on him in an instant, the butt of his pistol connecting with the side of Leo's head. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain. Leo collapsed back into the dirt, his ear ringing, the taste of blood in his mouth. Chloe screamed, struggling against the man holding her. The big man ripped the sketchbook from Maya's hands. He started flipping through the pages, his brutish face contorted in a parody of artistic appreciation. He laughed as he passed the drawings of fantastical creatures. Then he stopped. His smile faded. He ripped a page out of the book and handed it to Thorn. Thorn looked at the drawing. His face, which had been a mask of cruel amusement, went rigid. The drawing was dark, chaotic. A child's rendering of a nightmare. It showed a small room, a single bed, a little girl cowering in the corner, and standing over her, a man. His face was a swirl of angry lines, but one feature was drawn with chilling, unmistakable clarity, a jagged, ugly scar that ran through his left eyebrow. Thorn's hand went instinctively to his own face, to the faint, silvery line that bisected his left eyebrow, a scar he'd gotten in a bar fight years ago, long before he was a hero. A scar that only someone who had seen him up close, in a moment of rage, would remember. Maya wasn't just drawing fantasies, she was drawing memories. A memory from before her adoption, a memory of Marcus Thorn. He looked from the drawing to Maya, and for the first time, there was no amusement in his eyes. There was only a cold, reptilian fury. The liability wasn't just Harrington's secret anymore, it was his own. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft. "The little bird remembers." He crumpled the drawing in his fist. The pretense was over. The game was over. This was no longer about intimidation, it was about erasure. He walked over to the pile of their backpacks. He pulled out Chloe's, rummaged through the side pocket, and pulled out her leather-bound journal. He held it up. "And what about this one?" he said, his eyes locking on Chloe, the writer. "What secrets are you telling in here?" Chloe's heart stopped. Her journal, it was her soul, her sanctuary. It contained everything. Her poems, her observations, her fears, her distrust of Thorn from the moment she saw him, her notes about the men at the gas station, her suspicions. It was a written record of their entire ordeal. It was a witness. "It's just poetry," she said, her voice shaking for the first time. "It's nothing." "Let's see," Thorn said, a cruel smile returning to his face. He opened it to the last entry. His eyes scanned the page. He read her words aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. "Highway 95, the beast is dead. Some creeps from the gas station sabotaged us. I know it. And the sheriff. There's something wrong with him. His smile is like a crack in a perfect vase. He looks at us like we're not people, like we're insects. I'm scared. Maya is too. She saw them first. She sees everything. I wish we'd never stopped." He closed the book with a snap. Insects, he repeated softly. He looked at her, his eyes glittering with a terrible light. You're a smart girl, Chloe, too smart. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just Thorn. It was the whole system he represented. The trust they had placed in his uniform, in his authority, had been a trap. He had used their vulnerability, their faith in the law, as a weapon against them. He had engineered their breakdown, their rescue, and now, their execution. The witness, Chloe, had seen the truth. And now the antagonist, Thorn, held the proof in his hands. The conflict had escalated from a vague threat to an imminent death sentence. He turned to his men. The casual cruelty was gone, replaced by cold, hard command. Get the shovels. The words hung in the air, heavier than stone. Shovels. The desert floor, which had seemed so solid, suddenly felt like the thin crust over a waiting grave. Sam, who had been quiet, broken, on the ground, looked up. The mention of shovels seemed to flip a switch in him. The fear was still there, but something else rose to meet it. A primal, cornered animal rage. He was the son of a preacher, a boy who believed in right and wrong. And this was a degree of wrong he couldn't comprehend, couldn't accept. He surged to his feet, a roar tearing from his throat, and charged at Thorn. It was a desperate, suicidal act of defiance. He was all heart and muscle, running on pure adrenaline. Thorn, a combat veteran, didn't even flinch. He simply sidestepped Sam's clumsy charge, brought the butt of his pistol down hard on the back of Sam's neck, and dropped him like a sack of stones. Sam hit the dirt and didn't move. Maya screamed, the sound ripping from her throat. Leo, his head throbbing, struggled to his knees. He saw Sam lying motionless on the ground. He saw the shovels being pulled from the back of the pickup. He saw the cold, dead finality in Thorn's eyes. The hope he had clung to his entire life, the belief in second chances, was finally extinguished, beaten out of him on the floor of this God-forsaken desert. Thorn walked over to him, the open journal still in his hand. He tore out the page he had read and let the wind take it. Then he looked down at Leo, his face unreadable. Your father died on a road just like this, didn't he, son? Thorn said softly. The words were a deliberate, calculated cruelty, a twist of the knife. It's a family tradition. He raised his pistol. The last thing Leo saw was the sun glinting off the barrel, and the cold, empty sky behind it. The desert was ready to swallow another secret. The shot was a flat, ugly sound in the vast silence. But it wasn't the only sound. At the exact same moment, another noise, faint but distinct, reached them. The worry, buzzing sound of a drone. Thorn froze, his pistol still raised. His head snapped up, scanning the sky. His two men did the same. For a split second, everyone was looking up, searching for the source of the sound. It was a small, commercial drone, the kind a hobbyist might use, hovering a few hundred feet above them. A tiny blinking red light on its underbelly confirmed it was recording. Panic, for the first time, flashed across Thorn's face. A witness, an electronic, impartial, unblinking eye in the sky. His carefully controlled arena had been breached. Shoot it down, he barked at his men. One of them fumbled in the truck for a shotgun, while the other raised a handgun, firing wildly into the air. The shots were loud and useless. The drone was too high, too small a target. It tilted, and then zipped away, heading back in the direction of the highway with surprising speed. Thorn's face was a mask of fury. He had been so close. Absolute control had been snatched from his grasp. Get in the truck, he snarled. At his men, find it, find whoever is flying it, now. The two men scrambled into their pickup, spraying dirt and gravel as they tore off down the dirt track in pursuit of the drone. Thorn was left alone with the four teenagers and the unconscious Sam. His perfect, clean execution had just become a messy public spectacle. He was exposed. He looked down at Leo, then at Chloe and Maya, who were staring at him, their terror momentarily replaced by a sliver of wild, desperate hope. He lowered his pistol. Killing them now was risky. The drone footage, wherever it was going, changed everything he needed to control the narrative. He needed to get ahead of the story. He grabbed a set of zip ties from his cruiser. He bound Chloe's and Maya's hands behind their backs, his movements rough and efficient. He did the same to Leo. He then hauled the still unconscious Sam into the back of the cruiser like a side of beef. He shoved the others into the car. "One word," he hissed, his face inches from Chloe's, "and I will finish this right here, drone or no drone. You understand me?" Chloe nodded, her eyes wide. The sliver of hope was gone, replaced by a new, more complicated terror. They were alive, but they were prisoners. Pawns in a game that had just become infinitely more dangerous. As Thorne slammed the door, Chloe's gaze fell on the ground where her journal lay, forgotten in the chaos. The wind was flipping through the pages, a silent testament to the truth. Its secrets exposed to the indifferent sky. The drone had been a fluke, a 1 in a million chance. It belonged to a storm chaser who had been tracking a weather pattern miles away and had sent his drone to get a better view of the horizon. He hadn't been looking for them. He hadn't even realized what he was filming until he got back to his motel room that night and reviewed the footage. He saw the police cruiser, the pickup truck, the figures on the ground. He saw a man in a sheriff's uniform raise a pistol. He couldn't make out faces, but the implications were horrifying. He was a quiet man, a man who avoided trouble. He wrestled with his conscience for hours. Fear told him to delete the footage, to forget what he saw, but he couldn't. He uploaded the video file to a secure cloud server and sent an anonymous email with the link to the state police headquarters in Carson City. Then he packed his bags, checked out of the motel, and drove east, not stopping until he was 2 states away. He had planted a seed of truth and then run for his life. The email landed in the inbox of a young, ambitious state trooper named Maria Sanchez. She was a digital forensics expert, a new breed of cop in an old-school world. She almost dismissed the email as a crank submission, but something about the anonymous sender's panicked tone made her click the link. She watched the video, once, twice, a third time, zooming in, enhancing the grainy footage. She couldn't see faces clearly, but she could see the uniform, the badge, the pistol. She ran the license plate of the cruiser. It came back registered to the Washoe County Sheriff's Department. Assigned to Sheriff Marcus Thorne, a cold dread settled in her stomach. This was big, and it was dangerous. Accusing a decorated sheriff of something like this was career suicide, unless she had irrefutable proof. The video was a bombshell, but it wasn't enough. It showed a confrontation, but it didn't show a murder. It didn't show the faces of the victims. It was a clue, not a confession. Meanwhile, Thorne was in damage control mode. He knew the clock was ticking. He drove the 4 teenagers not to a grave, but to an abandoned mining shack deep in the mountains. A place from his troubled youth, a place no one knew he still used. He locked them in the dark, musty cellar. His story was already forming in his mind, a new lie to cover the old one. The kids had been on drugs, he would say, hallucinating. They'd attacked him, and he'd been forced to restrain them. He'd found a massive stash of narcotics in their trucker stash. He would plant himself, using drugs from his own evidence locker. He would paint them as delinquent drug runners, and himself as the hero cop who brought them down. He would discredit them before they could ever speak. He made a phone call to his silent partner, Mr. Harrington. "We have a problem," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A big one." He explained about the drone. Harrington, a man for whom problems were simply obstacles to be removed, was cold and pragmatic. "The girl is the source of the problem," he said, his voice like ice. "Her memories, the drawings. As long as she is alive, we are at risk. The others are irrelevant, they are just noise. But the girl, she is the spark that can burn everything down. You need to extinguish it, Marcus, permanently." The message was clear. Maya had to die, not just disappear, die, and it had to look like an accident, an overdose, a tragic consequence of her supposed drug-fueled delinquency. The plot twist had shifted. It was no longer about a cover-up of a past crime. It was about the commission of a new one. The stakes had been raised from exposure to murder. Down in the cellar, the 4 friends huddled together in the darkness. Sam had woken up, his head pounding, his memory of the assault a confusing, terrifying blur. Leo, his own head, bandaged with a strip of cloth torn from his t-shirt, explained everything. The sabotage, Thorn, the drawing, the graves, they were meant to fill that the reality of their situation sank in. They were not victims of a random crime. They were witnesses in a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of their community. No one was coming to save them. The sheriff, their only hope, was their captor. My journal, Chloe whispered in the dark, the words tasting like ash. He has my journal. He knows that I knew. He knows I wrote it all down. He has Maya's drawing, Leo added, his voice grim. He knows that she remembers him. A terrible silence fell over them. They were the evidence. Their memories, their words, their art. They were living, breathing proof of Thorn's crimes, and he would never let them go. But Chloe's mind, the sharp, analytical mind that Thorn had mocked, was already working. Fear was a lens, and it was bringing everything into sharp focus. The drone, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the despair. He panicked when he saw the drone. Why? Because it's evidence he can't control. He can control us, he can discredit us, he can kill us, but he can't kill a video file. So what? Sam said, his voice thick with hopelessness. Someone has a video of us in the desert. Thorn will just lie his way out of it. He's the sheriff. Who are they going to believe? They'll believe the truth if we can get it to them, Chloe insisted, a spark of her old fire returning. The journal is gone. The drawing is gone. But there's one other piece of evidence he doesn't know about. One thing he missed. They all looked at her. What are you talking about? Leo asked. Chloe took a deep breath. My phone. When he took our backpacks, he threw them in a pile. Mine was on top. When he grabbed my journal, my phone must have slipped out of the side pocket. It fell into the dirt. I saw it just before he slammed the door of the cruiser. It was a long shot, a fragile, desperate hope. The phone was back at the site, in the dirt. But it was there. It has a tracker on it, Chloe continued, her words coming faster now. And I have a cloud account. Everything backs up automatically. Photos, notes, everything. A few minutes before the engine died, I took a picture of the map, and I geotagged it. The location, the exact GPS coordinates of the spot where Thorn had taken them. The spot where 4 shallow graves were waiting. And there's more, she said, her voice dropping. It's voice activated, when he was threatening us, right before he pulled the trigger on you, Leo. I whispered the activation command. Record everything. A stunned silence filled the cellar. It was recording, Maya whispered, her voice filled with awe. The whole thing, Chloe confirmed. His confession about Harrington, his threats, the gunshot, everything. It's all on a voice memo, and if I had a signal, it's already been uploaded to the cloud. A recording, a digital diary, a confession from the killer's own mouth. The full conspiracy, laid bare. It was the hidden clue, the bombshell, that could blow the whole thing wide open. The stakes had just shifted again. It was no longer about their survival. It was about getting that recording into the right hands. It was about taking a personal nightmare and turning it into a public scandal that would burn Thorn and Harrington to the ground. Their prison in the cellar was no longer a tomb. It was a war room. The fight for their lives had just become a fight for justice. And Chloe, the girl with the cynical heart and the poet's soul, had just handed them the weapon they needed to win. The cinematic payoff began not with a bang, but with a click. The click of Trooper Maria Sanchez opening a new email. This one wasn't from a panicked storm chaser. It was an automated alert from a cloud service provider, flagged for suspicious activity. A user account, registered to one Chloe Pierce, had just uploaded a large audio file from a device that was now offline. Its last known GPS coordinates, pinging from a remote, inaccessible patch of Washoe County. The same patch of desert where the drone footage had been filmed. Sanchez's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the corroborating evidence. She listened to the audio file. The voice was unmistakable. It was the smooth, authoritative baritone of Sheriff Marcus Thorne. And he was confessing. He was talking about a cover-up, about a business partner named Harrington, about silencing a girl who remembered too much. Sanchez heard the fear in the teenagers' voices. She heard a girl named Chloe whisper, "Record everything." She heard the brutal thud of a pistol whipping a young man. She heard the final damning words, "It's a family tradition." And then, the sharp, ugly crack of a gunshot. It was the smoking gun. A confession, a motive, and the identity of the victims, all wrapped in a single audio file. Sanchez knew she couldn't go through normal channels. Thorne had allies everywhere. The local DA was his fishing buddy. The judge owed him favors. To hand this evidence over would be to see it buried. She had one shot to make this public, to create a firestorm that no one could control. She made 2 calls. The first was to her commanding officer at the state police, a tough, old-school captain who trusted her instincts. She laid it all out, the drone footage, the GPS coordinates, the audio confession. She requested a full tactical team to be deployed immediately, but to hold position 5 miles from the coordinates. They were not to engage until they heard from her. The second call was to a journalist she knew at the Las Vegas Review-Journal, a bulldog reporter with a reputation for breaking big, corrupt stories. She gave him the audio file and the GPS location of the abandoned Bronco. She told him, "Get your cameras there. Something big is about to happen, and you're going to want to be rolling when it does." Meanwhile, in the cellar, the 4 friends were planning their escape. They had a weapon, the truth, but they were still trapped. Thorne had been gone for hours. He'd returned once, his face a grim, determined mask, and taken Maya. He'd told the others he was taking her to a doctor, that she was having a panic attack. But they saw the look in his eyes. They knew he was going to kill her, to stage her overdose as Harrington had ordered. Leo, his grief and fear forged into a cold, hard rage, had found a loose stone in the cellar wall. For hours he'd worked at it, his fingers raw and bleeding, until he'd managed to pry it free. Behind it was soft, crumbling mortar. He used the stone as a tool, chipping away, creating a small opening to the outside. It was a desperate, back-breaking effort, as Thorne's cruiser pulled away with Maya in the passenger seat. Chloe pressed her ear to the small hole Leo had made. She could hear the crunch of tires on gravel. "He's leaving," she whispered. "He's taking her away. We have to go now," Leo said, his voice urgent. He gave the wall one last, desperate shove. A section of the stone collapsed, creating an opening just big enough to squeeze through. Sam went first, his powerful frame barely fitting. He helped Chloe through, and then Leo. They were free, but they were in the middle of nowhere, and Thorne had Maya. "He's going to kill her," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "We have to stop him." "How?" Sam asked, looking around at the empty, mountainous terrain. "We don't even know where he went." "I do," Leo said. He pointed to a faint trail leading down the mountain. "This leads to the old processing plant. It's the only other structure for miles. It's where he would take her. A place where no one would hear her scream." The chase was on. 3 desperate teenagers, unarmed and injured, scrambling down a treacherous mountain path to save their friend from a killer cop. Thorne drove Maya to the abandoned or processing plant. A skeletal ruin of rusted metal and crumbling concrete. It was a place of ghosts, a perfect setting for his final terrible act. He dragged her inside, into the vast, cavernous main chamber. He had a syringe in his pocket, filled with a lethal dose of heroin he'd taken from the evidence locker. The story was simple. The troubled girl, despondent over her arrest, had managed to get to a hidden stash and taken her own life. It was tragic, but believable. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, Maya," he said, his voice devoid of any real emotion. "You're a sweet kid, but you draw too much." Maya, her face streaked with tears, looked up at him. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A flicker of defiance. The little girl who had been haunted by nightmares her whole life was finally facing her monster. "I remember you," she said, her voice small but clear. From the dark room. You were yelling. You had that scar. Thorn's face tightened. You should have kept that to yourself. He advanced on her, the syringe in his hand. At that exact moment, Leo, Chloe, and Sam burst through a rusted-out doorway. Leo was holding a length of heavy iron pipe he'd found outside. "Get away from her," he yelled, his voice echoing in the huge, empty space. Thorn spun around, surprised. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Insects," he muttered. "You just don't know when to die." He drew his pistol. The confrontation was stark, cinematic. The four teenagers, battered but unbroken, standing against the lone, corrupt lawman. The ruins of the plant, like a coliseum around them. "It's over, Thorn," Chloe said, her voice ringing with a conviction. She didn't feel we know everything about Harrington, about what you did to Maya all those years ago. The state police have the recording. It's all over. Thorn laughed, a hollow, ugly sound. "A recording? You think that's going to save you? I am the law here. I'll kill all of you, and I'll write the report myself. Self-defense, resisting arrest. It'll be my word against 4 dead junkies." He raised his pistol, aiming at Leo, but before he could fire, a new sound filled the air. The unmistakable thump-thump of helicopter rotors. Thorn's head snapped up. Through a gaping hole in the roof, he could see them. 2 state police helicopters, circling like birds of prey. And then, the wail of sirens from the road below. The tactical team was here. The journalist was here. The world was here. His face, for the first time, showed not just anger or annoyance, but genuine fear. He was trapped. The walls he had built around his secret kingdom were crumbling. In that moment of distraction, Leo charged. He swung the iron pipe with all the force of his grief and rage. It connected with Thorn's wrist with a sickening crunch. The pistol clattered to the concrete floor. Thorn roared in pain and fury, clutching his broken wrist. He was a cornered animal now, lashing out with pure instinct. He lunged at Leo, his size and strength still formidable. The two of them crashed to the ground, a desperate, brutal struggle. Sam, seeing his friend in trouble, jumped into the fray. He pulled Thorn off Leo, wrapping his massive arms around the sheriff's neck in a chokehold. Thorn thrashed, his face turning purple, but Sam's grief-fueled strength was immense as they struggled. The first of the tactical officers burst into the plant, weapons raised, shouting commands. "State police, drop your weapon, get on the ground." The scene was pure chaos. The shouting officers, the swirling dust motes in the helicopter searchlights, the grunting, desperate fight on the floor. Chloe ran to Maya, pulling her away from the violence, and then she saw it. Thorn's pistol, lying on the ground a few feet away. Thorn, with a final desperate surge, threw Sam off him. He scrambled for the gun, but Chloe was faster. She snatched it up, her hands trembling as she pointed it at the man who had terrorized them. The world went into slow motion. Thorn, on his knees, his face a mask of hate. Chloe, holding the gun, her finger on the trigger. The police, shouting, advancing. "Don't do it, Chloe," Leo yelled. "He's not worth it." For a heart-stopping second, she was tempted. The power to end it, to deliver the justice he so richly deserved, was in her hands. But then she looked at his face, pathetic and broken, and she saw him for what he was. A small, frightened man who had hidden behind a badge and a gun. Killing him would make her like him. She lowered the gun. "He's all yours, officers," she said, her voice shaking but clear. The tactical team swarmed him, forcing him onto his stomach, cuffing his hands behind his back. As they hauled the great sheriff Marcus Thorn to his feet, a news camera's light flared to life in the doorway, capturing the moment for the entire world to see. The public arrest, the corrupt hero, exposed and defeated. The 4 teenagers, huddled together, alive and free. The cinematic payoff was complete. Justice, explosive and public, had finally arrived. The aftermath was a quiet, lingering echo. The world, which had exploded in a firestorm of media coverage, slowly moved on to the next scandal. But for the 4 of them, And for the parents who had waited in an agony of not knowing, the world would never be the same. The trial was a spectacle. Mr. Harrington, implicated by Thorne's recorded confession and a mountain of financial evidence, uncovered by Sanchez's investigation, tried to distance himself, but the web was too entangled. He was convicted of conspiracy and accessory to kidnapping. He would die in prison. Thorne's henchmen turned on him for lighter sentences, detailing years of corruption and intimidation. Thorne himself was a ghost in the courtroom. His broken wrist had healed, but his spirit was shattered. The aura of power was gone, replaced by the sallow, defeated look of a caged animal. He was convicted on dozens of charges, from kidnapping and attempted murder, to abuse of power and evidence tampering. The judge, a woman who had seen the raw terror on their faces during their testimony, gave him the maximum sentence on every county. Would never see the outside of a prison wall again. But justice is not the same as healing. The four friends returned home, but home was no longer a place of comfort. They were local celebrities, but also local curiosities, the kids, who had gone to the desert and come back changed. The whispers followed them in the grocery store. The sympathetic but pitying glances from people who could never understand. Sam's father, the Reverend, had tried to use the story as a parable in his sermons, a tale of God's deliverance. But Sam couldn't see God in what had happened. He saw only the ugliness of men. He stopped going to the gym. He stopped going to church. He spent his days in his room, the boisterous happy-go-lucky boy replaced by a quiet, haunted man who couldn't reconcile the evil he had seen with the faith he had been taught. Maya's adoptive parents, humiliated by the scandal, sold their house and moved away, taking Maya with them. They enrolled her in therapy, showered her with gifts, trying to buy their way back into her affections. But the bond was broken. Maya finally understood the source of her nightmares. Her art changed. The dark, swirling monsters were gone, replaced by stark, empty landscapes. She was no longer drawing her fear. She was drawing her reality. She and Chloe wrote to each other every week, to survivors bound by a shared trauma. Leo and Chloe tried to make it work. They were heroes, lovers who had faced death together. But the desert had left a scar on them too. Leo, who had always been the sun, was now eclipsed by a permanent shadow. He sold the Bronco. He couldn't stand to look at it anymore. The joy he'd once found in machines was gone, replaced by a deep-seated distrust. He couldn't shake the sound of Thorne's voice. It's a family tradition. He felt like he had been destined for that grave, and his survival was just a temporary cosmic error. Chloe, the witness, found she could no longer write poetry. Her words felt hollow, unequal to the task of describing what she had endured. The cynicism that had once been a shield was now a prison. She saw Thorne's smile in every politician, his cruelty in every act of injustice. The world was no longer a place of flawed beauty. It was just flawed. They drifted apart. The love that had been forged in a high school hallway, unable to survive the heat of a desert execution. The treaty they had made was broken. A year after the trial, Amelia Hayes and David Pierce drove back, out to Highway 95. They didn't rent an RV this time. They drove in David's quiet sedan. They pulled over at the spot where the Bronco had been found, where the journalists' cameras had first documented the scene. The state had erected simple, white crosses on the side of the road. They weren't graves, but memorials. A reminder of what had almost been. The names were engraved on small brass plates. Leo Hayes, Chloe Pierce, Samuel Johnson, Maya Lynn. Amelia got out of the car and walked to the crosses. She ran her hand over her son's name. The grief was still there, a dull, constant ache in her chest. But the rage was gone. The desperate need for answers had been satisfied. She had found her son, not in a shallow grave, but in the fierce, protective love he had shown for his friends. She had found him in the courage he had displayed in the face of pure evil. David stood beside her, his arm around her shoulder. They were not lovers, but they were family. Bound by a shared nightmare and a shared salvation. He was a good boy, David said softly, his eyes on Chloe's name. She was a good girl. They all were, Amelia whispered. They stood there. For a long time, the desert silence no longer a liar. It was just silence now. Empty, vast, and peaceful. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, a gentle sigh of remembrance. The road trip was over. They had never made it to the music festival. But in a way, they had come back. Not the same carefree kids who had left, but as survivors, their lives forever defined by the 4 days they were lost, and the lifetime they would spend remembering. The desert had taken their innocence, but it had not taken their lives. And in that, there was a quiet, bittersweet, and haunting kind of victory. The emotional echo of their ordeal would linger forever, a testament to the cost of truth and the enduring strength of the human heart.